The fluorescent lights of Memorial General Hospital hummed their sterile melody, casting everything in that particular shade of despair that only emergency waiting rooms seem to cultivate. William Smith sat in a plastic chair that had molded itself to 1,000 anxious bodies before his calloused hands clasped between his knees, watching the second hand of the wall clock tick forward with agonizing precision. Each rotation felt like a small death, a countdown to something he couldn't name but could feel settling into his bones like winter frost. His daughter was dying 3 floors above him. Emma. Sweet, brilliant Emma, who at 7 years old could recite the periodic table and still believed that dandelions were wishes waiting to happen. She'd collapsed during recess, her teacher had said over the phone, her voice shaking. Seizures. Uncontrollable. The ambulance had taken her, and William had driven like a man pursued by ghosts, his construction truck leaving rubber on the highway as his heart hammered a prayer he'd forgotten how to finish. The waiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and anxiety, that peculiar combination of bleach and human fear that no amount of air freshener could mask. William's work boots were still caked with drywall dust from the job site he'd abandoned mid-shift. His flannel shirt had a coffee stain on the collar from that morning, a lifetime ago now, when Emma had bumped his arm while showing him a drawing of the solar system she'd made for science class. He'd laughed then, tousled her hair, promised they'd go stargazing on Saturday. Now Saturday felt like a destination on a map written in a language he couldn't read. Around him, the waiting room held other stories, other private catastrophes. An elderly woman clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. A young couple held hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white, their eyes fixed on the double doors that occasionally swung open to deliver news, good or devastating. There seemed to be no middle ground. A teenager with a broken arm scrolled through his phone with his good hand, wincing periodically, his mother filling out paperwork with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd done this before. William had been here for 4 hours and 17 minutes. He knew this because he'd checked his watch approximately 600 times, each glance a small act of masochism, each minute an eternity stretched on a rack of helplessness. The doctor appeared at 11:47 p.m. Dr. Patricia Westmore, her name tag read, though her face held all the warmth of a tax audit. She was young, perhaps 30, with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes that had already calculated William's worth and found it wanting. Her white coat was pristine, her stethoscope arranged just so around her neck like jewelry, like a status symbol. Behind her stood 2 people in suits, hospital administrators, William would learn, though they looked more like undertakers measuring him for a coffin. "Mr. Smith," Dr. Westmore began, her clipboard held against her chest like a shield. "Your daughter has a rare autoimmune encephalitis. Her brain is essentially under attack from her own immune system. Without immediate treatment, plasma exchange, immunosuppressants, possibly rituximab, she has perhaps 72 hours. The words hit William like physical blows. 72 hours. 3 days. The same amount of time it took him to frame a house, to transform lumber and nails into something resembling shelter. Except this wasn't about building. This was about preventing collapse, about shoring up the most precious structure in his universe before it crumbled beyond recognition. William's world contracted to a pinpoint. "Then we do it. Whatever she needs. I'll work double shifts, triple. The treatment protocol will cost approximately $340,000, the older administrator interrupted, a man named Gerald Hutchins, whose silver cufflinks probably cost more than William's monthly rent. His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone who delivered financial devastation with the same inflection he might use to order coffee. Your insurance covers $70,000. You'd be responsible for the difference. And that's just the initial phase. Long-term care, follow-ups, medications, we're looking at close to $500,000 over the next 2 years. William's mouth went dry. The numbers were so large they became abstract, meaningless, like trying to comprehend the distance between stars. He made $47,000 a year swinging a hammer, building homes for people who'd never remember his name. His savings account had $1,200 in it, carefully accumulated over 2 years of skipping lunches and ignoring the check engine light in his truck. His house, a modest 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood where the American dream went to die quietly, cost him $950 a month. $500,000 might as well have been $500 million. I'll get a loan. I'll sell everything I have. My house, my truck, Mr. Smith. Dr. Westmore's voice cut through his desperation like a scalpel, precise and cold. Be realistic. You're a single father with marginal income. No bank will loan you that kind of money. And even if they did, you'd be drowning in debt for the rest of your life. Your daughter's condition, even with treatment, her prognosis is uncertain. There's a significant chance of relapse, of permanent neurological damage. She might never be the same child you knew. The clinical detachment in her voice made William's stomach turn. She was talking about Emma, his Emma, who wrote him notes that said, "Daddy, you're my favorite person," with a heart over the I, who sang off-key in the shower, who insisted on reading the ingredients on every cereal box because she wanted to be a scientist, and scientists needed to gather data, as if she were a math problem with an acceptable loss margin. "What are you saying?" William's voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as his own. Gerald Hutchins adjusted his glasses with one manicured finger, the gesture somehow condescending. "We're saying that sometimes the most merciful option is palliative care. Keep her comfortable. Let nature take its course. It's not an easy decision, but it's a practical one. You need to think about your own future, Mr. Smith. Bankrupting yourself won't bring her back if the treatment fails. And statistically, practical." William tasted the word like poison, like bile rising in his throat. "You want me to let my daughter die because it's practical." "We want you to consider all options," Dr. Westmore said, though her tone suggested there was really only one acceptable answer. One path that didn't inconvenience the hospital's accounting department. Treatment would bankrupt you, and for what? A child who might never fully recover, who might require assisted living for the rest of her life, who might not recognize you, might not be able to feed herself, might spend decades in a vegetative state. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is allow a peaceful passing rather than prolonging suffering. William stood so abruptly his chair scraped across linoleum like a scream, the sound piercing and raw in the quiet waiting room. Every head turned toward them, but he didn't care. His hands were shaking, his whole body vibrating with a rage so pure it felt like righteousness. "She's 7 years old. She still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Pickles that she's had since she was 2. She wants to be a scientist. She collects rocks and labels them with their mineral composition. She writes me notes that say, 'Daddy, you're my favorite person,' with a heart over the I because I haven't had the heart to correct her spelling. Last week she asked me if stars ever get lonely because they're so far apart. And you're standing here telling me she's too expensive to save? That her life has a price tag and I can't afford it?" "Mr. Smith, lower your voice," Gerald warned, glancing nervously at the other families in the waiting room, as if William's grief might be contagious, might inspire other poor people to demand expensive miracles. "No." William's hands were shaking now, rage and terror fighting for dominance in his chest, his vision narrowing to the 3 faces before him, faces that represented everything wrong with a system that valued profit over breath, solvency over souls. "No, I won't lower my voice. That's my daughter up there. That's my whole world. My wife died giving birth to her. Did you know that? Complications, unexpected. The doctor said everything was fine right up until it wasn't, and then she was gone, and I was left with this tiny, perfect human who needed me to be everything, mother and father and hero and protector.
And I've tried. God knows I've tried. I work 60-hour weeks. I miss parent-teacher conferences because I'm on a job site 2 hours away. I pack her lunches at 5 in the morning and read her bedtime stories at midnight when I finally get home. And now you're telling me it's not enough? That all of that, all of us, is worth less than your quarterly profits? Dr. Westmore's expression hardened into something that might have been pity or contempt. William couldn't tell the difference anymore, and wasn't sure it mattered. We'll give you 24 hours to decide. But understand this, every hour we wait decreases her chances. The disease is progressing. If you can't secure funding by tomorrow night, we'll have no choice but to move her to hospice care. It's hospital policy. Policy, William repeated, the word ashes in his mouth. My daughter is dying, and you're quoting policy. They left him standing there, a man carved from grief and fury, in a waiting room that smelled of industrial cleaner and crushed dreams, surrounded by strangers who quickly looked away from his pain as if it might infect them, might remind them that catastrophe respects no class distinctions, no income brackets, no carefully constructed illusions of security. William didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The thought of Emma lying in that hospital bed, machines breathing for her, her small body fighting a war she didn't understand, made sleep impossible. Instead, he sat in the hospital cafeteria with his phone, making calls that became increasingly desperate as the hours crawled past. He called his brother in Arizona, who worked in insurance sales and had always seemed comfortable, successful. "Man, I wish I could help," Derek said, and maybe he meant it. But with the kids in college and Sarah's medical bills from her surgery, we're stretched thin. I can send you 500 maybe. 500, a drop in an ocean of need. He called his father, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years after a fight about money. Bitter irony that. The old man listened in silence and then said, "I told you that construction work wouldn't build a future. Told you to go to college. Maybe this is God's way of teaching you about consequences." He hung up without responding, his hand trembling so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He called every person he'd ever met, every distant relative, every friend from high school he hadn't spoken to in years. Most offered sympathy and excuses in equal measure. A few sent $20, $50, $100, generosity that touched him even as its inadequacy crushed him. His old foreman, Marcus, sent $2,000 with a note that said, "You're the best worker I ever had. I'm sorry it's not more." By 3 a.m., William had set up a GoFundMe, typing out Emma's story with shaking fingers, attaching a photo of her from her last birthday, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, holding a cake shaped like the planet Saturn because she'd been obsessed with the rings. By noon the next day, it had raised $8,000. Generous, heartbreaking, and utterly insufficient. Strangers had sent $5, $10, messages of hope and prayer that felt like bandages on a severed artery. "Praying for your little girl," one comment read. "God will provide," said another. William wanted to believe them, wanted to have faith that the universe would bend toward justice, but the hospital's deadline was a guillotine suspended above hope, and he could feel its weight with every passing hour. He went to 3 banks before noon, each loan officer delivering the same verdict with varying degrees of sympathy. The first, a young woman named Jennifer, who looked barely old enough to drink, reviewed his application with genuine sadness. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Smith. Your debt-to-income ratio just doesn't support this kind of loan. Even if I wanted to approve it, and I do, the system won't let me. Have you considered a medical credit card?" William had laughed, a sound without humor. "A credit card? For $500,000? Jennifer had blushed, looking down at her desk. "I know. I'm sorry. I wish there was something." The second loan officer, an older man named Robert, was more direct. "Medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in this country, Mr. Smith. Even if you got this loan, you'd lose everything within a year. Your house, your truck, your ability to work. Because who's going to hire a man with $1 million in medical debt hanging over him? Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is say no. Kindness. That word again, weaponized against hope. The third bank didn't even call him in for a meeting. His application was denied online within 40 minutes. At the fourth bank, a man named Marcus, different from his old foreman, though the name felt like a cruel joke, actually laughed when William explained what he needed the money for. Not a malicious laugh, exactly, but the bitter chuckle of someone who'd seen this story too many times. Medical debt is the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country, Marcus had said, shaking his head like William was a child asking for the moon. I'd be doing you a disservice approving this. You'd be in collections within 6 months, your credit destroyed, your wages garnished, and for what? A treatment that might not even work? Sometimes you have to accept reality, friend. Reality. That word again, wielded like a weapon against hope, as if accepting reality meant surrendering to it, as if fighting impossible odds was foolishness rather than love. William left the bank in a daze, the afternoon sun too bright, the world continuing its rotations with offensive indifference to his crisis. People walked past him on the sidewalk, businessmen checking phones, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing about nothing. And he wanted to grab them, shake them, make them understand that his universe was collapsing, while they bought coffee and complained about traffic. By 6 p.m. on the second day, William stood in Emma's hospital room, watching machines breathe for her. Her small body looked impossibly fragile beneath the white sheets, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow like spilled sunlight. Someone, a nurse probably, had brushed it carefully, arranged it so she looked peaceful rather than comatose. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm, saline, he'd learned, just keeping her hydrated. Nothing that would actually save her, just delaying the inevitable, buying time he couldn't afford to purchase. Her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Pickles, sat on the bedside table where William had placed it, its button eyes seeming to accuse him of failure. He'd brought it from home that morning, along with her favorite book, a dog-eared copy of A Wrinkle in Time that she'd read at least a dozen times. He'd thought maybe, somehow, she'd know they were there, that love could bridge the gap between consciousness and coma, that his presence could anchor her to this world. Now, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, mechanical, controlled by a ventilator, he felt the full weight of his powerlessness. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered, taking her small hand in his. Her fingers were cold, so cold, and he rubbed them gently, trying to warm them, trying to pour life back into her through sheer force of will. "I'm sorry, baby girl. Daddy tried. God, I tried so hard. I called everyone. I went everywhere. I begged. And it wasn't enough. I'm not enough. I'm so sorry." His voice broke, and he laid his head on the edge of her bed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He'd promised her mother, whispered it to the ceiling of the delivery room while Emily took her last breath, that he'd protect her daughter, keep her safe, give her everything she needed. And now, here he was, 7 years later, breaking that promise because the world measured love in dollars, and he came up short. Behind him, he heard the door open. Dr. Westmore, he assumed, coming to deliver the final judgment, to take Emma away to hospice, where she could die in comfort, where he could watch her fade over days or weeks, helpless and hollowed out. But the voice that spoke was different, older, accented with something Eastern European, textured with the weight of experience, and something else, something that sounded almost like understanding. "Mr. Smith? My name is Dr. Yuri Volkov. I've been reviewing your daughter's case." William turned to find an elderly man, perhaps 70, with silver hair that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, and eyes that held genuine sorrow, not pity, sorrow. There was a difference, and William had become an expert in reading the distinction over the past 2 days. Dr. Volkov's face was mapped with wrinkles that spoke of laughter and grief in equal measure. His hands garled but steady, his posture slightly stooped but dignified. He wore a white coat
over a cardigan that looked hand-knit, the kind of garment made with care rather than purchased with convenience. "I don't have the money," William said flatly, turning back to Emma. "I know. Everyone knows. You can move her to hospice whenever you want. Just let me say goodbye first, please." Dr. Volkov stepped closer, his movements careful, measured, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I'm not here about money. I'm here because I lost a daughter once." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. William looked up, saw the old doctor's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Leukemia," Dr. Volkov continued, his accent thickening with emotion. "In Ukraine, 40 years ago, we had no money, no options. The Soviet system, they said her treatment would be wasteful, that resources must go to productive citizens, not to children who might not survive. I was just a medical student then, watching her fade, holding her hand while she cried and asked me why I couldn't make her better. She was 6 years old. Her name was Katya." His voice cracked, just slightly. "She loved butterflies, drew them on everything, walls, papers, her own arms with marker. She said they were proof that things could transform, could become beautiful, even after being trapped." William found himself standing without realizing he'd moved, drawn toward this stranger who understood, who knew the specific taste of this particular agony. "I became a doctor because I couldn't save her," Dr. Volkov said. "I came to America, worked every hour God gave me, specialized in immunology because I wanted to save the Katyas of the world. And I have saved some, but never enough. Never enough to balance the scales, to make peace with that moment when I had to tell my wife that our daughter was gone because we were the wrong kind of people with the wrong amount of money." He met William's eyes directly. "But I can save yours." William's breath caught. "What?" "I will perform the treatment, tonight, now, and I will absorb the cost personally." The offer was so unexpected, so impossible that William couldn't process it. "Why?" The question came out as a sob. "Why would you do that? You don't know us. We're nobody." Dr. Volkov's smile was sad and beautiful, a sunrise after an endless night. "Because I became a doctor to save children, not to count money. Because your daughter deserves a chance, because someone should. Because 40 years ago, no one did this for me, and I have carried that weight every day since. Because I am old now, and tired, and I have money that sits in banks doing nothing while children die. Because I looked at your daughter's file and saw my Katya, brilliant, curious, full of potential that the world wants to discard like trash." He placed a hand on William's shoulder, the gesture infinitely gentle. "Let me give you what I never had. Hope." William couldn't speak. Words had abandoned him, fled to some distant country where language still made sense. He could only stare at this elderly doctor who'd appeared like something from a fairy tale, like a wizard in a white coat offering impossible gifts. "But the hospital," William finally managed. "Dr. Westmore said." Dr. Westmore is a child playing with spreadsheets. She has never watched someone she loves die for want of money. She has never held a small hand while it grows cold and wondered what kind of God allows such things. I have, and I swore when I came to this country that I would never let it happen again, not if I could stop it. The cost, I have been saving for 40 years. I live simply. I need little." Dr. Volkov's grip on William's shoulder tightened. "Let me do this. Let me finally balance the scales just a little.
Let me look at Katya's photograph tonight and tell her I saved someone today. Please." William collapsed into the old doctor's arms, weeping like he hadn't since Emily died, great heaving sobs that emptied him of everything: fear, rage, grief, gratitude, relief. Dr. Volkov held him steady, this stranger who'd become a savior, murmuring something in Russian that sounded like a prayer or a lullaby. The treatment began at midnight. William watched through glass as Dr. Volkov and a team of nurses worked with the precision of artists, exchanging Emma's plasma through a process that looked medieval and miraculous simultaneously. Machines hummed and beeped their mechanical songs. Bags of medication were hung, their contents flowing into his daughter's veins like liquid hope. It took 6 hours. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Volkov emerged, exhausted but smiling, his scrubs stained with sweat and determination. "She's stable. The next 48 hours are critical, but I believe she'll fight through this. She's strong, your daughter. Fighter spirit, like her father." William couldn't speak. He could only embrace this stranger who'd become a guardian angel, weeping into the old man's shoulder while the sun rose over a hospital that had tried to bury his daughter, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that felt like a promise, like a covenant between heaven and earth that maybe, just maybe, love could win after all. Emily woke up 3 days later. William was dozing in the chair beside her bed when he heard a small, raspy voice say, "Where's Mr. Pickles?" He jerked awake so fast he nearly fell out of the chair. Emily was looking at him, her eyes clear and focused, her hand reaching weakly for the stuffed rabbit on the bedside table.
"Emma? Baby! Oh, God, Emma!" William grabbed her hand, covering it with kisses, tears streaming down his face. "You're awake! You're awake! I'm here, baby! Daddy's here!" "Thirsty," she whispered, and William laughed so hard he thought his ribs might crack, the sound echoing off the sterile walls like a hymn of thanksgiving. Dr. Volkov appeared within minutes, summoned by a nurse. He examined Emma with gentle thoroughness while William stood by, unable to stop touching his daughter's arm, her hair, reassuring himself that she was real, that this wasn't a dream he'd wake from to find her still unconscious. "Good," Dr. Volkov declared after checking her vitals and responses. "Very good. The treatment is working. She'll need time, rest, more medication, but she will recover." He smiled at Emma, who was studying him with curious eyes. "Hello, young lady. I am Dr. Volkov. How do you feel?" "Weird," Emma said honestly, her voice still weak. "Why am I in the hospital?" "You were very sick," Dr. Volkov explained, settling into the chair on the other side of her bed. "But your body fought hard, and now you're getting better. You'll be home soon." "Did Daddy save me?" Emma asked, looking at William with complete faith in her eyes, the kind of trust that makes fathers into heroes whether they deserve it or not. "Yes," Dr. Volkov said, before William could respond. "Your father saved you. He fought very hard." William met the old doctor's eyes over Emma's bed, saw the understanding there, the gift he was giving, allowing William to be the hero in his daughter's story, protecting her from the knowledge of how close they'd come to catastrophe, how the world had tried to put a price on her life and found it too high. Dr. Westmore appeared once during Emma's recovery, 3 days after she'd woken up. William was helping Emma with a puzzle, working on motor skills, Dr. Volkov had said, keeping her mind engaged, when the door opened and the young doctor stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Smith," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I wanted to inform you that Dr. Volkov is under review. He violated protocol by performing unauthorized treatment without proper financial clearance. The hospital board is meeting next week to determine if his actions warrant disciplinary measures." William stood slowly, carefully, setting down the puzzle piece he'd been holding. Emma looked up at him, sensing the tension, and he gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile before turning to face Dr. Westmore.
"He saved my daughter's life," William said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction, of a truth so fundamental it required no embellishment. "He set a dangerous precedent," Dr. Westmore replied, though something in her tone suggested this was a script she'd been given, words she didn't entirely believe. "We can't just get out." The command was soft, but Dr. Westmore's eyes widened. "Mr. Smith, get out." William took a step toward her, not threatening, just immovable, a wall of righteous anger that had found its target. "You stood in a waiting room 2 weeks ago and told me to let my daughter die. You said she was too expensive, that saving her wasn't practical, that sometimes love means letting go. You looked at a 7-year-old girl and saw a budget problem. So no, Dr. Westmore, you don't get to come in here and criticize the man who actually understood that some things, some people, are priceless. You don't get to tell me about protocol and precedent when Dr. Volkov is the reason my daughter is alive. You don't get to be in this room. Get out." Dr. Westmore's face flushed red. For a moment, William thought she might argue, might pull rank or threaten him with security. But something in his eyes must have convinced her. Or perhaps it was the way Emma was watching her with the unnervingly direct gaze of children who sense villainy even when they don't understand it. She left without another word. "Daddy?" Emma asked. Why was she mean? William returned to the bed, smoothed her hair. "Sometimes people forget what's important, sweetheart. Sometimes they get confused about what matters. But Dr. Volkov remembers, and I'll never forget." Emma recovered slowly, miraculously. Dr. Volkov visited every day, bringing crossword puzzles and books about space, teaching her Russian words for star, moon, and comet. He told her stories about growing up in Kiev, about the winters when snow would pile so high you could tunnel through it like a rabbit warren, about his mother who made borscht that could cure any sadness, about his Katya who loved butterflies. "She sounds nice," Emma said one afternoon, working on a puzzle Dr. Volkov had brought, a map of the solar system. "She was," Dr. Volkov said softly. "She was very much like you. Curious, brave, kind."
Me too, little one. Me too. But perhaps some small part of her lives on in every child I save. Perhaps that's enough. William watched this exchange from the doorway, his heart so full it hurt. Dr. Volkov caught his eye and smiled, and William understood that they were family now, bound not by blood but by something stronger, by grace given and received, by second chances and butterfly wings. 3 weeks later, Emma was discharged. Dr. Volkov met them at the hospital entrance with a wheelchair, protocol, he said, though Emma protested she could walk, and rolled her out into the sunshine. She squinted at the brightness, giggled when a butterfly landed on the wheelchair's armrest, insisted on taking a photo of it with William's phone. "See, Dr. Volkov, it's a sign. It's from Katya." Emma was beaming. "Yes," the old doctor said, his voice thick. "Yes, I think perhaps it is." They exchanged phone numbers. Dr. Volkov made William promise to call if Emma had any symptoms, any concerns, anything at all. Day or night, he insisted. "I mean this. You are not alone anymore." 5 years passed like water. Emma thrived, her disease in remission, her mind sharp as ever. She was 12 now, talking about medical school, about wanting to help people the way Dr. Volkov had helped her. William had moved up to foreman at the construction company, his boss recognizing the quality of his work and the steadiness of his character. He'd saved enough to buy a small house with a backyard where Emma could plant her dandelions and conduct experiments that mostly involved mixing dirt with water and declaring it moon soil. Dr. Volkov had visited often, becoming a fixture in their lives. Grandpa Yuri, Emma called him, and he'd never corrected her. It seemed to treasure the title more than any medical degree. They had dinner together every Sunday, Dr. Volkov teaching Emma chess and Russian curse words, which William pretended not to notice, and the names of stars in languages dead and living.
Dr. Volkov had passed away 2 years after saving Emma, his heart giving out in his sleep. Peaceful, the coroner had said, which seemed like a mercy for a man who'd known so much pain. At his funeral, held in a small Orthodox church that smelled of incense and history, William learned the truth. The old doctor had spent nearly everything he had on treatments for patients who couldn't pay. He died with $400 in his bank account and the gratitude of 47 families who'd been told their loved ones were too expensive to save. 47 lives, 47 Emmas, 47 second chances given by a man who'd never gotten his own. The mourners at the funeral had shared stories: a mother whose son needed a kidney transplant, a grandfather whose cancer treatment had been deemed too costly, a teenager with a rare blood disorder given 48 hours to decide. Each one saved by Dr. Volkov's stubborn refusal to let money be the final judge of worth. William had delivered the eulogy, Emma standing beside him, both of them weeping as they tried to put into words what Dr. Volkov had meant, what he'd represented. "He taught us," William had said, his voice breaking, "that love is the only currency that matters, that some debts can never be repaid, only passed forward, that every life has value beyond calculation." Emma had added in her clear young voice, "He told me once that butterflies don't know they're beautiful, they just keep flying." I think he was like that. Now, 3 years after Dr. Volkov's death, 5 years and 3 months after Emma's treatment, William stood in his kitchen making breakfast. Emma was at the table doing homework, humming to herself, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking so healthy and whole it still sometimes made him catch his breath with gratitude. There was a knock at the door. William wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, expecting a neighbor or a delivery man. The man standing there wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than William's first car, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind of garment that announced its wearer lived in a different economic universe. He carried a briefcase in one hand, leather and expensive, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a kind face that looked perhaps 50 years weathered. "Mr. William Smith?" "That's me." William felt a flutter of unease. Men in suits at the door rarely brought good news. "My name is Robert Thorne. I'm the executor of Dr. Yuri Volkov's estate. May I come in?" William's heart clenched, old grief rising fresh. "I already attended the funeral. If this is about... I don't have money to contribute to a memorial fund or anything. I'm sorry. I wish I could. It's about an inheritance, Mr. Smith. May I?" William stepped aside, dazed, leading Robert into the small living room. Emma looked up from her homework, curious. "Hi," she said with the easy friendliness of children who hadn't yet feared strangers in suits. "Hello, young lady," Robert said warmly. "You must be Emma. Dr. Volkov spoke of you often." They sat at William's kitchen table, the same table where Emma did her homework, where she'd drawn pictures of Dr. Volkov with angel wings, where they'd eaten countless meals and built a life from ruins. Robert opened his briefcase with practice efficiency, pulling out documents that looked important and intimidating.
"Mr. Smith, Dr. Volkov was a complicated man," Robert began, his tone gentle, like someone delivering news that might detonate. "He told very few people about his past. Before he came to America in 1991, after the Soviet Union collapsed, he was one of their most brilliant research scientists. He developed a polymer compound, a revolutionary material with applications in aerospace, medicine, manufacturing, even construction. In the chaos of the dissolution, he managed to secure the international patent privately. It was unprecedented and extremely valuable." William frowned, trying to follow. "I don't understand what this has to do with..." "For 30 years, Dr. Volkov licensed that patent to various corporations around the world. The money was substantial, tens of millions of dollars over the decades. But he lived simply: a small apartment, second-hand furniture, an old car. He worked constantly at the hospital, often refusing salary for treating patients who couldn't pay. He gave most of his money away,
to medical charities, to families in crisis, to research foundations. Most people who knew him had no idea he had any wealth at all. The room seemed to tilt. William gripped the edge of the table. Most of it? Robert pulled out a document, official-looking with seals and signatures. When Dr. Volkov died, his estate was valued at $127 million. His will is very specific. Half goes to establishing a charitable medical fund in his daughter's name, the Katya Volkov Foundation, dedicated to providing free treatment for children with rare diseases. The other half, Robert, the inheritance of purpose, a story of redemption and grace. William Smith sat in a lawyer's office, struggling to comprehend the impossible. Dr. Yuri Volkov, the elderly Ukrainian doctor who had saved his daughter Emma's life, had left him and Emma $63.5 million. The news shattered William's understanding of reality, transforming his modest life in an instant. 3 years earlier, Emma was dying from a rare autoimmune condition. Memorial General Hospital, through Dr. Westmore and Administrator Gerald Hutchins, had pushed William toward palliative care, citing costs and low survival rates. They gave him 48 hours to decide whether his daughter was worth the expensive treatment. William, a construction worker who'd already lost his wife Emily to cancer, faced an impossible choice: watch his daughter die or drown in insurmountable debt. Dr. Volkov intervened. The retired immunologist working part-time at the hospital saw Emma's case and recognized something familiar in William's desperation. Volkov took over Emma's treatment personally, performing an experimental procedure that saved her life. He covered all costs, dismissing William's concerns about payment with gentle insistence. Over the next 3 years, Volkov became Grandpa Yuri to Emma, bringing her chocolate crossword puzzles, reading Russian fairy tales, and joining them for Sunday dinners. What William didn't know was Volkov's backstory. 40 years earlier in Soviet Ukraine, Volkov's 6-year-old daughter Katya had died from the same condition that nearly killed Emma. He'd been a brilliant scientist, but desperately poor, unable to afford the treatment that might have saved her. After immigrating to America, a polymer patent he'd developed made him wealthy, millions of dollars arriving decades too late to help his own child. This cruel timing could have broken him permanently, but instead it became his redemption. Volkov spent his fortune saving other people's children, trying to reach back through time to save Katya by saving everyone else. Emma represented his greatest success, a child with Katya's condition who survived, because this time money wasn't an obstacle. Volkov had set up the trust 2 days after saving Emma, knowing his heart was failing. He'd had 2 previous heart attacks and understood his time was limited. He wanted to ensure William and Emma would never face financial desperation again, and that they could help others escape the nightmare he had lived through. The lawyer, Robert Thorne, delivered not just news of the inheritance, but also a letter Volkov had written for Emma's 12th birthday. The letter explained everything: how Katya's death had defined him, how bitterness nearly consumed him, how discovering wealth felt like a cosmic joke until he realized it was opportunity. "I didn't save you because I'm a good person," Volkov wrote to Emma. "I saved you because it was the only way I could save myself." The letter instructed Emma to use the money wisely, to help people and save lives, but also to live fully. "Money is only paper until it becomes purpose," he wrote, encouraging her to honor Katya's memory not through endless grief, but through joyful possibility. He'd arranged for advisors to help manage the foundation he envisioned, with one critical instruction: never let wealth make you cruel or insulate you from others' pain. William and Emma transformed the inheritance exactly as Volkov hoped. They established the Volkov-Smith Foundation, dedicated to paying medical bills for families facing impossible choices. Emma, despite her young age, became a board member, reviewing applications with the gravity of someone who remembered being on the other side of such decisions. The foundation's impact grew exponentially. 16 families the first year, 43 the second, 87 the third. Each represented a life saved, a future restored. A single mother's son needing a kidney transplant, a veteran denied cancer treatment, a teenager with a rare blood disorder. The ripples extended beyond individual families, sparking conversations about healthcare ethics and perverse incentives that prioritized profits over patients. The scandal at Memorial General led to Dr. Westmore's resignation and Gerald Hutchins' firing. Both had been incentivized to discourage expensive treatments, prioritizing profit margins over human lives. The hospital implemented reforms, though William understood these were inadequate solutions to systemic problems. 5 years after Volkov's death, William and Emma dedicated the Volkov-Smith Children's Medical Center, a bright, hope-filled facility where no child would be denied care due to inability to pay. Emma, despite her young age, became a board member, reviewing applications with the gravity of someone who remembered being on the other side of such decisions. Emma threw herself into her studies, volunteering at hospitals and working in Volkov's old lab space, driven by the understanding that her survival carried responsibility. The foundation would help 300 families that year, 500 the next. Each family represented the multiplication of grace. Volkov's attempt to save Katya transformed into hundreds of saved lives, creating cascading compassion that spread like dandelion seeds on wind. Standing in their garden under the stars, William and Emma embodied Volkov's legacy. Not the money itself, but the radical belief that some things transcend price tags, that love can transform paper into purpose, that the most expensive thing in the world, hope, should be given freely to all who need it. Somewhere beyond this world, William believed Yuri Volkov held Katya's hand, finally understanding that debts can't be fully repaid, but can be infinitely multiplied through grace. His failure to save one daughter had become the salvation of hundreds of children, proving that sometimes redemption arrives not through erasing the past, but through transforming its pain into purpose for others' futures.
Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.